Hi, I'm Dog. Welcome back to Key West and the UBL. Orlando asked a question about home run stats, and I thought I'd go a little bit behind the numbers and take you behind the numbers with me. It's an interesting little journey. The Key West batting stats for 2017, and yeah, so let's take a look at it. Here you see we're on our stats page, the team stats. It's accessible from the home page here. The right hand column is pitching and defense, and I pretty much I think I glanced on those, touched on those the other day. Starters ERA, bullpen ERA, both first in the Eastern League. Neither one of those is very surprising. I built a our ballpark, for one. Our ballpark tends to inhibit run scoring, tends to inhibit runners on base, and I've built a very strong infield defense and outfield defense, for that matter, often at the expense of hitting. So it's not terribly surprising that after a few seasons that we led the league in starters ERA and bullpen ERA. Runs allowed, we were first in the league by a pretty wide margin. I think Louisville was second with like 400 and something. Hits allowed, 900. We led the Eastern League in hits allowed. And that's a tribute to our pitching and defense. Opponents average. We limited opponents to the lowest batting average and also the lowest batting average on balls in play. The difference between batting average and batting average on balls in play is that batting average is simply the results from being at the plate. You could foul the ball off, you could strike out, and both of those things they don't put the ball in play. So batting average on balls in play is always a little bit higher, always at least a little bit higher, because when you put the ball in play, you give the chance, you have a chance for a good thing to happen. Home runs allowed at 63. We were first in the Eastern League, and I was very happy with that. That is in part due to our ballpark factors. It's also due to the fact that I focus on pitchers with high movement ratings. If they don't have a high movement rating, I'm not real interested in having them in Key West. I've been having some second thoughts about this. Also, the flip side of that is that pitchers with a high movement rate tend to throw a lot of ground ball outs. So my pitching staff, I've purposefully selected pitchers with a high ground ball rate, very high ground ball percentage, and pitchers who are not on my team with a high ground ball rate, I look at them with love in my eyes because I want them on my team. But I've lately been having some second thoughts about that. And that second thought is this. If you play in a large park and your outfielders are fast and mobile and cover a lot of turf, why not bring in fly ball pitchers to give your outfielders a chance to make outs, instead of bringing in ground ball pitchers who throw ground balls, a lot of which will make it through the infield. And you can't record a fly ball out with a ground ball. Basically what I'm saying is a fly ball pitcher gives my outfield a chance to make an out. And I really haven't built the team that way. And so that's the second thought I've been having about my whole defensive structure. If I make changes to it, it'll probably be slow and incremental, though, and I'll be carefully sort of testing it as I go. Bases on balls, we were fourth in the Eastern League in walks. I'm not real thrilled with that, but at the same time, I purposefully sacrifice control for movement. I would rather have a guy with high movement than a guy with low movement or mediocre movement and high control. I'd rather have high movement and mediocre control than mediocre movement and high control. I've got one of those guys, Kevin Adams. He has mediocre stuff, mediocre movement, and very high control. And he got rocked this year. He tends to be bipolar. He gets knocked out of the park, or he pitches a three-hit shutout. So he'll probably be back in my rotation next year, back at the bottom of the rotation, maybe as a spot starter. Adams, by the way, was a third-round draft pick, so he has exceeded expectations. Strikeouts, we were 7th in the Eastern League. I don't recruit strikeout pitchers, or I haven't in the past. I like pitchers that put the ball in play, and they tend to be cheaper too. Contact pitchers tend to be a lot cheaper than flamethrowers. So, ideally you want a guy who has high stuff, who can strike out a lot of guys, who has high movement, doesn't give up many home runs, and high control, and doesn't walk many people. But those are the guys who command the $12 and $20 million salaries around the UBL. They are rare and they are premium. And I've got one, Francisco Guerrero. I call him Frank because I get tired of typing Francisco. But he's one of the elite. And finally, defensive efficiency. When the ball is hit to the infield, do they handle it? And do the outfielders, for that matter, handle it? Do they make the putouts that they're supposed to make with few errors? And our team does that very well. That's something I've been working towards every season that I've been in the UBL, is a high defensive efficiency. Now back to the team batting average. Number 1 in home runs. First in home runs. I'm expecting Madison was second, so let's take a look at him. Tied for second with 109. Richmond's always good in home runs, but they kind of had an off year this year. Yeah, Richmond was 4th. Richmond has dominated hitting in many years, but they really had a down year. They had a lot of injuries. Old Radford up there had a bunch of injuries, more than he always has injuries, but he had more than he usually has. And however, he only finished 7 games out, so still had a good team. I'm guessing Louisville was number 2 in home runs. No, Louisville was 6th. I guess they only hit home runs against me. Well, I don't know who it would have been. It wouldn't have been Raleigh. Chesapeake was a good hitting club, but 8th in home runs. Wow. That leaves Nashville and Raleigh and Charleston. Charleston was 7th. Nashville 5th. Raleigh. Oh, the Don Drain, who's no longer in Raleigh. He's in Radford. Go figure. The Don Drain. You know, Raleigh always plays great defense against me. Maybe it's my ballpark. Yankee King, I think you built your team for Margarita Field, pal. Screw you, by the way. Just kidding. So, first in home runs. And yet, 4th in runs scored. 5th in on-base percentage. First in home runs. 2nd in slugging. 2nd in on-base plus slugging. OPS plus. First in strikeouts. 3rd in walks. But 5th in batting average. 5th in on-base. 4th in runs scored. This right here, 5th in batting average, 5th in on-base, is why we were so mediocre in runs scored, despite hitting a lot of taters. The taters, by the way, this number really surprised me. We have had guys on our club who can hit for power. We've always had guys who can hit for power. Unfortunately, they've been surrounded in the lineup for most years by weak hitters. Strikeouts. I have worked purposefully and consciously on this number since I came into the league. If you strike out, you're not putting the ball in play. And so I have worked on finding batters with a high high K rating. Batters who don't strike out very often, who do anything except strike out. Still got some work I want to do on that. But stolen bases, 8th in the Eastern League by choice, by design. I set my stolen base slider all the way at the minimum. As a sort of a test, I wanted to see just how much stolen bases mattered. And here we were, 8th in the Eastern League by a wide margin. Look at Louisville, 151st in the Eastern League. I have mixed feelings, but obviously stolen bases did not hurt their team. Guksta has always been a fan of speed, and I think speed, stolen bases, first in on-base percentage, second in batting average, second in runs scored, all that kind of feeds together. Second in strikeouts, he didn't strike out very much. His guys got on base and they scored. They got on base, they stole bases, and they scored. Very much of a contact team as opposed to a power team, almost like Tony La Russa's St. Louis Cardinals. It's good in defense, not elite in defense, but good, really good. Good enough in defense. Yeah. So I want to go, in the next episode, I want to go even further behind the numbers. But I want to keep this episode at a good and reasonable length. So I'll end here with another quick look at a recap of Key West Parrot Head's batting stats. First in home runs, fewest in strikeouts, third in walks. I've consciously and purposefully recruited hitters with good eye. Last in stolen bases, middle of the Eastern League in runs scored and batting average hits. So those, looking at these big numbers, kind of always gives me a sense for what I need to work on in the club, what I need to do in the off season, and as always, they will the numbers will fuel some of my decisions coming up into 2018. All right, well, I'm out. Thanks for viewing. See you next time.